math people. Today's lesson revolves around finding the slope of a line when given 2 points on that line. Alright, so the last lesson we dealt with calculating the slope of a graph. So we actually looked at a graph and we calculated its slope. Today we're taking the graph away, so there's no graph. Alright, so find the slope of the line passing through negative 10, 0, that's our first point, and negative 13, 3. Alright, so we want to calculate the average rate of change, or the slope of this line. Now, in previous lessons, like I said, we had a graph. Well, we don't have a graph right now, but we still know what slope is. We know that slope is our rise over run. It's our change in y over our change in x. Alright, and even though we don't have a graph to look at, we can still calculate this. Now, one of the techniques I like to use for this is creating a table. Alright, so each point that they give us is an x and y value. Negative 10 is an x value, 0 is a y value. Negative 13 is an x value, 3 is a y value. Now what we can do here is we can create a table. This isn't the only way, but it's one of the ways I like to teach it. So we can create a table of x and y values, and we input our points. Alright, so our first x, or our first input, is negative 10. And that corresponds to a y value, or an output, of 0. Our next point is negative 13 for x, and that corresponds to an output of 3. Now, once we have our table set up, we have to find the pattern. Alright, we basically find our jumps, or our changes in y and our changes in x. Alright, so let's start with our y values. How do we go from 0 to 3? So I like to draw an arrow going from the top number to the bottom number. How do you go from 0 to 3? Well, you add 3. And this corresponds to our delta y. Then we have to do our delta x, our jump in our x. How do we go from negative 10 to negative 13? Now be careful. We're actually getting smaller because negative 13 is smaller than negative 10. So that means we are subtracting, and the difference is 3. So we would subtract 3, and this corresponds to our delta x. Now what we're going to do is we're going to take these two values and plug them into our slope formula. So our slope is change in y over change in x, and in this case our change in y was 3, our change in x was negative 3. Alright, and we could just simplify that. 3 divided by negative 3 is the same as saying negative 1. Alright, it's normally a good idea to write your slope in simplest form. Alright, so the slope of the line passing between those 2 points is negative 1. Alright, so in summary, create a table, calculate your jumps, plug them into the slope formula, change in y over change in x. Alright, if you have any questions, feel free to email me.